What happens when two comedy legends clash on live television, and one of them refuses to back down? Tonight we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history, when Conan O'Brien was literally escorted off Jimmy Kimmel Live after a confrontation that left the audience speechless and the host visibly shaken. This isn't just another celebrity feud. This is the story of how professional rivalry turned personal, how a simple interview became a battleground, and how one man's ego destroyed decades of mutual respect in a matter of minutes. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story will change how you see these comedy icons forever. The tension had been building for months behind the scenes. Industry insiders knew something was brewing between Jimmy Kimmel and Conan O'Brien, but nobody expected it to explode the way it did on that Tuesday night taping. Conan had agreed to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live to promote his new podcast venture, what should have been a friendly chat between two comedians who had worked together for years at various networks. But from the moment Conan walked onto that stage, something felt different. Jimmy's opening monologue that night had been particularly pointed, with several jokes that seemed aimed directly at his guest. The audience laughed, but those who knew the history between these two men could sense the underlying hostility. When Jimmy introduced Conan, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and his usual warmth was replaced with something much colder. Conan, ever the professional, maintained his trademark grin as he took his seat, but even he seemed to sense that this wasn't going to be the typical late-night banter session. The first few minutes played out normally enough, with Jimmy asking about the podcast and Conan delivering his usual self-deprecating humor. But then Jimmy decided to bring up the elephant in the room. "So Conan," Jimmy said, leaning back in his chair with that practiced television host casualness, "I have to ask about something that's been bothering me for a while now." The audience perked up, sensing that something juicy was coming. Conan's eyebrows raised slightly, but he kept his composure. "Oh, really? What's that, Jimmy?" Conan replied, his voice carrying just a hint of wariness. Jimmy's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "Well, I've been hearing some things around town. Some people saying that you've been talking about me behind my back, saying some pretty unflattering things about this show, about my comedy style." The studio audience fell silent, the energy in the room suddenly thick with tension. Conan's famous quick wit kicked in immediately. "Jimmy, I think there might be some confusion here. I've always had nothing but respect for what you do, and I certainly haven't been bad-mouthing you to anyone." His tone was diplomatic but firm, clearly trying to defuse whatever bomb Jimmy was attempting to detonate. But Jimmy wasn't backing down. "See, that's interesting, because I have it on good authority that, at a Writers Guild event last month, you made some pretty colorful comments about how quote-unquote easy my job is compared to what you had to deal with at NBC." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and even the usually supportive studio audience seemed uncomfortable. Conan's face reddened slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Jimmy, I think someone's been playing telephone with whatever conversation you're referring to. If I said anything about the challenges different hosts face, it wasn't meant as a criticism of you personally." He was clearly trying to de-escalate, but Jimmy had tasted blood in the water. No, Conan, let's be honest here," Jimmy pressed on, his voice getting sharper. "You said, and I quote, that anyone could do what Jimmy Kimmel does because all he has to do is read jokes other people write and pretend to be friends with celebrities who are just there to sell something." The audience gasped audibly at this revelation. The accusation was specific enough and damaging enough that Conan couldn't just laugh it off. His trademark nervous laugh emerged, but there was steel in his voice when he responded. "Jimmy, first of all, even if I had said something like that, which I'm not admitting to, bringing it up like this on your show, in front of your audience, seems like a pretty hostile way to handle whatever issue you think we have." Jimmy's fake television smile was now completely gone, replaced with something much more genuine and much uglier. "Hostile? You want to talk about hostile? How about spending years building a career on being the quirky, lovable underdog while secretly thinking you're better than everyone else in late night? The gloves were officially off. The studio audience was now completely silent, watching this professional relationship implode in real time. Conan's composure was starting to crack, his famous self-control being tested in ways it rarely had been on live television. Jimmy, I don't know what's gotten into you tonight, but this isn't the place for whatever personal grievances you think you have with me. Oh, this is exactly the place, Jimmy shot back, his voice rising slightly. Because for too long, people, like you, have been able to hide behind your reputations while throwing shade at the rest of us who are just trying to do our jobs. The personal nature of the attack was becoming increasingly clear, and Conan was running out of diplomatic responses. People like me? Conan repeated, his own voice getting an edge to it. What exactly does that mean, Jimmy? The question carried weight, and everyone in the studio could sense that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Jimmy leaned forward, his television host persona completely abandoned now. It means comedians who think they're artists instead of entertainers, who think the rest of us are somehow beneath them because we didn't go to Harvard or work at Saturday Night Live. The class warfare element of his attack was unmistakable, and it hit Conan right where it would hurt most. Conan's famous self-deprecating humor had always been his shield in uncomfortable situations, but Jimmy's attacks were too personal, too calculated, and too public for deflection to work. The Harvard comment had clearly struck a nerve, and for the first time in the interview, Conan's diplomatic facade began to crack, in a way that revealed the sharp intelligence and quick temper that his closest friends knew existed beneath the goofy exterior. Jimmy, I think you're projecting some of your own insecurities onto me, Conan said, his voice steady but with an unmistakable edge. If you have an issue with my background or my career, that says more about you than it does about me. The comeback was measured but pointed, and the audience could sense that the dynamic in the room had shifted. Jimmy's face flushed red, clearly not expecting Conan to push back so directly. Insecurities? That's rich coming from someone who got fired from The Tonight Show and spent years acting like he was the victim. The low blow about Conan's NBC departure was clearly intended to wound, and from the sharp intake of breath from the audience, it had found its mark. But instead of backing down, Conan leaned forward in his chair, his famous height giving him a physical advantage even while seated. You know what, Jimmy? If we're going to air dirty laundry, let's talk about how you got your show. Let's talk about the phone calls you made, the deals you cut, the people you stepped on to get where you are. The implication was clear, and Jimmy's face went from red to pale in an instant. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Jimmy's voice was no longer television-friendly, the anger now completely unfiltered. The producers in the control room were undoubtedly having a panic attack, but neither host seemed to care about the cameras rolling. Conan's smile was no longer the warm, goofy grin his fans loved. It was something much sharper and more dangerous. It means that for someone who wants to talk about integrity and authenticity, you might want to examine your own rise to power before you start attacking others. The words were carefully chosen, but devastating in their implications. Jimmy stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. Are you questioning how I got my job? Are you seriously going to sit there and suggest that I didn't earn this? His voice was loud enough that the studio audience visibly recoiled, no longer just uncomfortable, but genuinely concerned about where this was heading. Conan remained seated, but his posture was no longer relaxed. I'm not suggesting anything, Jimmy. I'm stating outright that your version of how things work in this business is conveniently selective when it comes to your own career. The calm delivery of such a harsh accusation was somehow more damaging than if he had shouted it. Get out, Jimmy said suddenly, his voice dropping to almost a whisper but carrying more menace than his earlier shouting. I'm serious, Conan. Get off my stage. The studio fell completely silent. the only sound being the hum of the cameras that were still rolling. Conan finally stood up, his full height making him tower over Jimmy in a way that emphasized the physical tension in the room. "Are you actually kicking me off your show, Jimmy? On live television?" There was disbelief in his voice, but also something that sounded almost like satisfaction, as if Jimmy was proving a point Conan had been trying to make. "I'm not kicking you off," Jimmy replied, his voice still dangerously quiet. "I'm asking you to leave because clearly you can't conduct yourself professionally on my show." The attempt to make Conan look like the aggressor was transparent, but Jimmy seemed beyond caring about appearances. Conan looked out at the stunned studio audience, then back at Jimmy, and for a moment it seemed like he might apologize, might try to salvage the situation. Instead, he did something no one expected. He laughed. Not his trademark nervous laugh, but a genuine, deep laugh that seemed to come from somewhere authentic. "You know what's funny, Jimmy? I came here tonight thinking we were going to have a conversation between two comedians who respect each other. Instead, I find out that you've been harboring resentment for years, and rather than handle it like an adult, you decided to ambush me on your show." He was still laughing, but there was no humor in his eyes. Jimmy's anger seemed to intensify at Conan's laughter. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. You're the one who's been running your mouth around town, thinking you're untouchable because of your reputation." The desperation in his voice was becoming more apparent, as if he realized that his ambush wasn't going according to plan. "My reputation?" Conan repeated, the laughter stopping abruptly. "Jimmy, my reputation is exactly why what you're doing right now is so transparent. Everyone watching this knows that I didn't come here to fight with you. They can see exactly who's behaving professionally and who isn't." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to highlight the contrast between his composure and Jimmy's obvious loss of control. The studio audience was now completely silent, watching two masters of comedy destroy each other with the same skills they usually use to entertain. But there was nothing entertaining about this. It was genuinely uncomfortable to witness, like watching a marriage fall apart in public. Jimmy seemed to realize that he was losing the narrative battle, and his next move was pure desperation. "You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? You think because you went to Harvard and wrote for The Simpsons that you're some kind of comedy genius, while the rest of us are just hacks." The accusation was so broad and bitter that it revealed more about Jimmy's own insecurities than anything else. Conan's response was swift and devastating. "I think I'm a comedian who's worked hard for 30 years and has never felt the need to tear down other comedians to make myself feel better about my own career. Can you say the same thing, Jimmy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that Jimmy couldn't ignore, and everyone in the studio knew that whatever happened next would define both men's legacies in ways that neither of them had probably anticipated when this interview began. Jimmy's face went through a series of expressions, from anger to confusion to something that looked almost like panic, as if he was finally realizing the magnitude of what he had started. "Don't you dare lecture me about tearing people down," Jimmy said, his voice shaking with rage. "You've spent your entire career hiding behind this nice guy image while secretly thinking you're the smartest person in every room." The accusation was so personal and so bitter that several audience members could be heard gasping. Conan's composure was extraordinary under the circumstances, but there was steel in his voice when he replied. "Jimmy, the only person tearing anyone down tonight is you. I came here as your guest to promote a project and have what I thought would be a friendly conversation. Instead, you've turned this into some kind of public trial based on gossip and your own apparent resentment." His words were measured but cutting. Jimmy began pacing behind his desk, his nervous energy making him look increasingly unhinged. "Gossip? You want to call it gossip when multiple people heard you say that late-night television has been dumbed down since people like me started hosting shows?" The accusation was specific enough to seem credible, but vague enough that it was impossible to verify. Even if I had said something like that, which I haven't, it wouldn't justify this kind of public humiliation, Conan replied, his voice remaining steady despite the obvious provocation. But since you seem determined to make this about me personally, let me ask you something, Jimmy. What's really eating at you? Because this level of hostility doesn't come from nowhere. The question seemed to catch Jimmy off guard, and for a moment his mask slipped completely. You want to know what's eating at me? I've spent 15 years watching you get praised for being authentic and original, while doing the same damn job the rest of us do. I'm tired of the media treating you like you're somehow more legitimate than other late-night hosts. The raw honesty of the confession was startling. Conan's expression softened slightly, as if he was seeing Jimmy's pain for the first time. Jimmy, I've never asked to be treated differently than any other host. If the media has created some kind of hierarchy, that's not something I've encouraged or benefited from intentionally. For a moment it seemed like the conversation might turn toward actual understanding. But Jimmy wasn't ready to back down. Benefited from? Are you kidding me? Your whole brand is built on being the tortured artist who's too good for commercial television. Meanwhile, you're doing exactly the same thing the rest of us are doing. You're just pretending it's somehow more noble. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. Conan stood up straighter, his patience finally reaching its limit. You know what, Jimmy? If you think what I do is so easy and fake, maybe you should examine why you're so threatened by it. Because nothing I've done in my career has been aimed at diminishing other comedians, which is more than I can say for what you're doing right now. The gloves were completely off now. Jimmy's response was swift and vicious. Threatened? By you? That's hilarious, coming from someone whose biggest achievement was getting fired from The Tonight Show and turning it into a career resurrection story. The personal attack was clearly designed to inflict maximum damage, and from the sharp intake of breath from the audience, it had landed. But instead of getting angry, Conan smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. You know what, Jimmy? Thank you. Thank you for showing everyone exactly who you really are when the cameras are rolling, and you think you have the upper hand. This has been incredibly illuminating. The calm delivery of such a devastating assessment was more effective than any shouting match could have been. Jimmy seemed to realize that his attack had backfired, making him look petty while Conan looked dignified. Get out, he said again, but this time his voice was pleading rather than commanding. Seriously, Conan, just leave. This isn't working. The admission of defeat was obvious to everyone watching. Conan looked out at the studio audience one more time, many of whom were clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. I want to apologize to all of you for what you've had to sit through tonight. This isn't what you came here to see, and you deserve better. The grace of the apology, directed at the audience rather than at Jimmy, was a masterclass in how to handle an impossible situation. As Conan began to walk toward the edge of the stage, Jimmy made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. Don't you dare try to play the victim here, Conan. Everyone saw you attack me personally, when I was just asking legitimate questions about things you've said. The revisionist history was so transparent that several audience members actually laughed. Conan paused at the edge of the stage and turned back toward Jimmy with a look that was equal parts pity and disappointment. Jimmy, I hope someday you figure out that tearing other people down doesn't make you any taller. Good luck with the rest of your show. With that, he walked off the stage, leaving Jimmy standing alone behind his desk, with a studio full of uncomfortable silence. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Jimmy's face as he realized that his ambush had not only failed, but had backfired spectacularly. His attempt to humiliate Conan had instead revealed his own insecurities and unprofessional behavior to a national television audience. The silence in the studio was deafening, broken only by the sound of Conan's footsteps as he left the building. What? Did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen anything like this on late-night television? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, And make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity stories that you won't believe actually happened.